7 days after I buried my wife, my daughter-in-law sat in Margaret's favorite chair and smiled as though she had already won. The flowers from the funeral had not even begun to wilt. Margaret's perfume still lingered faintly in the hallway. Her reading glasses were still resting beside the unfinished novel on her nightstand. Yet Olivia leaned forward, crossed her legs, and looked directly at me. "Now that the old woman is gone, you need to put the company in Norman's name and learn to take care of yourself." For several seconds, I said nothing. My son Norman lowered his eyes. He did not defend his mother. He did not tell his wife to show some respect. He sat quietly while the woman who had raised him, protected him, and loved him for 33 years was reduced to 2 cruel words. The old woman. Something inside me went still. Not broken. Still. It was the silence that comes before a building finally gives way. Olivia mistook my calm for surrender. Her smile widened. "You're 61, Stephen," she continued. "You should retire, move somewhere smaller, and let Norman handle the future." I looked at my son. He shifted in his chair but still said nothing. Then the door to my study opened. My attorney, David Hendricks, walked inside carrying a leather briefcase. Olivia's smile disappeared. David placed the case on my desk, removed a laboratory report, and looked at me one final time. "Stephen, are you certain?" I nodded. "Read it." David turned toward Norman. His voice was calm and professional. "The probability that Stephen Crawford is Norman Crawford's biological father is 0%. The grandfather clock stopped sounding like a clock. Each tick became an impact. Norman stared at the report. Olivia went pale beneath her makeup. And in that moment, everything they thought belonged to them began slipping away. But the DNA test was only the beginning. The real inheritance was not $12 million. It was a truth my wife and I had carried for 26 years. A truth that would either destroy my son or force him to become a man. My name is Stephen Crawford. I was 61 years old when my wife, Margaret, died after 35 years of marriage. 7 days later, my family gathered in my study to discuss what they believed they were about to inherit. Margaret's funeral had passed through my memory like a storm seen through fog. I remembered the church filled with white lilies. I remembered the minister speaking about grace, loyalty, and the quiet strength Margaret brought into every room. I remembered placing my hand on her coffin and feeling the cold polished wood beneath my palm. What I remembered most clearly, however, was Norman and Olivia. They had arrived late. Olivia complained that the flowers near the front obstructed her view. Norman spent most of the service checking messages beneath the program. While I said goodbye to the woman I had loved since I was 26, they watched the clock. They were not grieving. They were waiting. Waiting for the funeral to end. Waiting for the legal documents. Waiting for Crawford Industries to fall into their hands. People often reveal themselves around death. Some become kinder. Some become reflective. Others see an empty chair and begin calculating its value. Norman was our only child. At least, he was the only child Margaret and I had raised. I loved him from the first night I held him. That was true even after I discovered the truth about his blood. I paid for his education. I bought his first car. I gave him a position at the company. I financed his wedding. When he and Olivia wanted a house they could not afford, I provided the down payment and kept the title under a family trust. Every time Norman struggled, I removed the obstacle. I told myself I was helping. Looking back, I may have been teaching him that consequences belong to other people. Margaret saw the danger before I did. "He needs to learn how to stand," she told me more than once. "I don't want him to struggle the way we did." Struggling is how we learn what we could survive. I always promised we would become stricter later. Later never arrived. Then Margaret became ill. Everything else seemed less important. During her final months, Norman visited less frequently than some of our employees. He claimed work was demanding. The truth was that he barely worked. He held the title of Strategic Development Director at Crawford Industries, but most of his responsibilities were performed by assistants. He arrived late, left early, and attended meetings only when important clients were present. Olivia was even more distant. She sent flowers to the hospital but never stayed longer than 20 minutes. Margaret defended both of them until the end. "They're young," she would say. "They're in their 30s, I reminded her. She would smile weakly. To a mother, that is still young. That was Margaret. She could find a reason to forgive almost anything. Even the things that wounded her. Crawford Industries began inside a rented garage. I owned one truck, a used cement mixer, and a set of tools purchased on credit. Margaret handled the books from our kitchen table. During the first year, we worked 18-hour days and still worried about the electric bill. She answered phones while feeding Norman. She typed invoices after he fell asleep. When a client delayed payment and we could not cover payroll, Margaret sold the jewelry her mother had left her. She never told our employees. She simply handed me the money and said, "People who work deserve to be paid." That sentence became one of the principles on which we built the company. People who work deserve to be paid. People who remain loyal deserve loyalty in return. A business does not exist only to enrich the person whose name appears on the building. It carries the mortgages, medical bills, college dreams, and grocery budgets of every family depending on it. By the time Margaret died, Crawford Industries was worth approximately $12 million. We owned commercial properties, construction equipment, warehouses, and development rights throughout the region. But when I looked at the company, I did not see numbers. I saw Tony Fernandez working through the night during our first major contract. I saw Jim Sullivan bringing his infant sons to the company picnic. I saw employees who stayed when competitors offered more money because we had treated them with respect when times were difficult. Olivia saw property waiting to be sold. Norman saw an inheritance waiting to be transferred. That was why I called the meeting. Not to hand them the company. To discover whether anything remained inside my son worth trusting with it. The meeting was scheduled for 3 o'clock. I sat behind the mahogany desk Margaret gave me for our 10th anniversary. My fingers moved across its polished surface. Nearly every object in the room carried some part of her. A crystal paperweight from Ireland. A framed photograph from Norman's high school graduation. A coffee cup with the words "World's Most Stubborn Husband." Her handwriting remained on a yellow note beside the telephone. "Call the insurance agent." She had written it several weeks before entering the hospital for the final time. Norman arrived first. He wore a dark suit I had paid for. At 33, he had Margaret's height and her dark eyes. For most of his life, those similarities helped conceal the truth. Olivia entered behind him. Her blonde hair was arranged perfectly. Her designer purse cost more than some of our workers earned in a month. She had spent 8 years performing the role of a devoted daughter-in-law. At birthdays, she brought expensive gifts. At holidays, she volunteered to make speeches about family. But when Margaret became seriously ill, Olivia's visits grew shorter and her questions about our estate became more frequent. "Dad," Norman began, lowering himself into the leather chair. "I know this is difficult." His voice carried the careful patience of someone speaking to an elderly relative he believed was becoming inconvenient. "But we need to discuss practical matters." "What practical matters?" "The company." Olivia perched on the edge of the other chair. "Norman and I have already discussed several necessary changes." "Have you?" "We assumed you would want the transition to happen quickly." "I buried my wife 7 days ago." Olivia's expression barely changed. "We understand this is emotional." "No," I said quietly. "I don't believe you do." Norman leaned forward. "You're 61, Dad. You should retire. Travel. Enjoy what you built." "And who would run it?" "I would." The answer came immediately. Not because he was prepared. Because he believed the position belonged to him. "You have never supervised a construction crew." "I have an MBA. You cannot read half the field reports that cross your desk." "I would hire people for that." "We already employ those people. They report to someone who understands what they do." Olivia's nails tapped against her purse. "You're being unnecessarily difficult." "Am I?" "Now that the old woman is gone, you need to put the company in Norman's name and fend for yourself." There it was. No disguise. No polite grief. Only entitlement. Norman looked at her. For one brief moment, I thought he might object. Instead, he stared at the floor. I looked at the chair Margaret used whenever she visited me in the study. I imagined her sitting there. She had defended Olivia countless times. She was raised differently, Margaret would say. She needs time to understand our family. Olivia had been given 8 years. All she understood was the value of the assets. "What changes would you make?" I asked. Olivia brightened. She believed I was negotiating. "We would sell the warehouse district." "Why?" "The land is worth more than the buildings. The buildings generate income." "Not enough. They house 3 divisions and employ 40 people. Those employees could be reduced." "Reduced?" "Half of them are old enough to retire." Tony Fernandez was 58. His wife had recently begun cancer treatment. The insurance Crawford Industries provided was keeping their family from financial ruin. Jim Sullivan was 52. His twin boys would enter college in 3 years. To Olivia, they were not men. They were expenses. "Mother always said you were too sentimental," Norman added. The lie struck me harder than Olivia's insult. "Your mother never said that. She believed I should take over. She believed you needed to earn responsibility." Norman's jaw tightened. "She would have wanted the company to stay in the family." "It may." Olivia smiled. "Then we agree." "No." I opened the top drawer. Inside lay the sealed envelope containing the DNA results. "We need to wait for David." Norman frowned. "Why do we need an attorney?" "Because this is not a simple transfer." "It should be. There are things about this family you don't know." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "What things?" The doorbell rang. The sound moved through the house like a final warning. I stood. That would be David. As I entered the hallway, I heard Olivia whisper to Norman. "What has he done?" Norman had no answer. For 33 years, he had lived inside a truth Margaret and I constructed to protect him. That protection was about to end. David Hendricks had represented me for 15 years. He was in his mid-50s, sharp-eyed and careful with words. He shook my hand at the front door. "I'm sorry, Stephen." "Thank you." Margaret was remarkable. She was. David looked at me. "You can still change your mind." Margaret had asked me not to reveal the truth. During our final conversation in the hospital, she held my hand with what little strength remained. "He is your son in every way that matters," she whispered. "I know. Promise me the biology dies with us." At the time, I promised. But promises made to protect an innocent child can become chains when that child grows into an entitled man. I was no longer exposing Norman to punish him. I was exposing the truth because Olivia intended to use Margaret's death to seize what neither of them understood. "I'm certain," I told David. We entered the study. Norman and Olivia stood. David offered condolences. Olivia barely acknowledged them. "Mr. Hendricks, we appreciate you coming, but this is a family matter. Estate matters usually involve attorneys. Stephen is transferring the company to Norman." David raised an eyebrow. "Is he?" "No," I answered. "He is not." Olivia's face tightened. David placed his briefcase on the desk. "Stephen asked me to present several documents." He looked at me again. "Once this information is shared, it cannot be withdrawn." "Proceed." Norman stood. "What information?" I looked at him. "Do you remember being 7 years old and asking why you didn't look like me?" His expression changed. "You said I looked like Mom's family." "I lied." Olivia turned toward him. Norman stared at me. "About what?" "David." My attorney removed the report and placed it on the desk. "This DNA analysis was completed 3 weeks ago," he explained. "It compares genetic samples from Stephen Crawford and Norman Crawford." Norman's hands trembled as he lifted the paper. His eyes moved across the technical language. Then they reached the conclusion. "Probability of paternity, 0%. The paper shook visibly. "This is impossible." "The laboratory repeated the analysis," David said. "The result is conclusive." Norman looked at me. The hurt in his face nearly destroyed my resolve. "You're not my father?" "I am your father." "You just proved you aren't." "I proved we do not share blood." Since when did you know? I suspected when you were 7. His breathing became unsteady. You knew for 26 years? Yes. And you never told me? No. Olivia rose halfway from her chair. You lied to him for 26 years? I raised him for 33. Norman's eyes filled. Why? The question was not angry. It came from the frightened boy still living somewhere inside the man. Because you were innocent. He stared at me. Your mother and I went through a difficult period shortly before you were conceived. I forced myself to continue. The company was failing. We were arguing constantly. I was working day and night and had stopped seeing how lonely she had become. Did she have an affair? One weekend. Norman looked away. She attended a conference in Chicago. A client was there. His name was Robert Hayes. Did she love him? No. How do you know? Because she spent the next 34 years proving where her heart was. Norman's jaw tightened. Who is he? A marketing executive. Charming, according to Margaret. Married at the time. Did he know about me? No. What happened to him? He died in a car accident when you were 12. Norman lowered himself into the chair. The entire story of his life was rearranging itself inside him. What did you do when you discovered the truth? For 6 months, I was furious. At her? At her, at myself, at the world. Did you hate me? The question broke my heart. Never. I moved around the desk. You were 7 years old. You had scraped knees, questions about dinosaurs, and a habit of climbing into our bed during thunderstorms. My voice began to shake. You were my son before any laboratory told me otherwise. Then why tell me now? I looked at Olivia. Because the secret was being used as part of an assumption that everything I built automatically belongs to you. Olivia's grief lasted less than a minute. But what happens to the inheritance? Norman looked at her. His identity had just collapsed. Her first concern was money. David opened another folder. That is why I am here. He placed an ownership document beside the DNA report. Crawford Industries has always been solely owned by Stephen Crawford. What about Margaret's estate? Olivia demanded. Her will concerns the house, jewelry, personal accounts, and other individual assets. The company? Was never hers to transfer. Olivia's face became wide. Then Norman receives it from Stephen. Only if Stephen chooses. The word chooses changed the room. Norman looked at me with a mixture of fear and hope. You were never going to give it to me? You were planning to take it, I said. I never promised to hand it over. This is punishment, Olivia snapped. No. I returned to my chair. This is reality. Norman stared at the report. Did Mom suffer because of the secret? Every day. She wanted to tell me? Many times. Why didn't she? She believed you would hate her. Norman wiped his eyes. And you forgave her? I chose to. How? Not all at once. I looked at Margaret's empty chair. Forgiveness was not a feeling. It was a decision I made repeatedly until the pain no longer controlled our home. Olivia laughed coldly. How noble. I turned toward her. Margaret made one terrible mistake and spent 34 years living with honesty, loyalty, and remorse. My voice hardened. You insulted her 7 days after her death while demanding the company she helped build. Olivia looked away. Do not compare yourself to her. David removed another legal document. The company is held through the Crawford Family Trust. Norman looked up. What trust? The one your mother and I established 15 years ago. Why was I never told? Because the provisions concern succession, not entitlement. David opened the document. The trust prevents the company from passing automatically to anyone. Olivia leaned forward. What conditions are attached? I answered. Any successor must demonstrate a genuine commitment to the company, its employees, and its values. That means what? 5 years of meaningful work. Norman blinked. I have worked there for 8. You have held a title for 8 years. I attended meetings. You left when the difficult decisions began. I have an MBA. You have never prepared a bid, led a crew, managed a delayed project, handled a workplace injury, or sat across from an employee who cannot pay for his wife's treatment. Olivia's voice rose. You expect him to spend 5 years doing manual labor? I expect him to learn the company from the ground up. That is humiliating. No, I said. It is work. I opened a thick employee file. This is Tony Fernandez. Norman glanced at the photograph. I know Tony. You know his name. I turned the page. His wife, Rosa, is undergoing cancer treatment. Our health plan is the only reason they still have their home. I opened another record. Jim Sullivan has twin sons preparing for college. He has saved for 15 years. Another page. Carla Bennett has cared for her disabled brother since their parents died. Her flexible schedule allows her to keep him out of an institution. Norman looked through the files. His expression slowly changed. These are the people you plan to reduce, I said to Olivia. That is an emotional way to describe restructuring. It is an accurate way to describe destroying lives from a comfortable chair. Norman continued reading. Dad, I know these people. You recognize them. That is different. Olivia stood. This is manipulation. I am showing him what ownership means. You are guilting him into becoming your employee. I am offering him the opportunity to become a leader. Norman looked at me. What exactly would I have to do? Start at entry level. Olivia laughed. You cannot be serious. Normal salary. 6 o'clock start. No executive office. No assistant. No special treatment. For how long? Norman asked. Until you earn advancement. And after 5 years? If you show consistent effort, ethical judgment, financial responsibility, and respect for the people depending on this company, the trust allows you to inherit controlling interest. And if I refuse? The trust's alternate provisions take effect. David spoke. The company would either pass to qualified senior management or be dissolved through an orderly process. Employees would receive substantial severance and profit-sharing distributions. Remaining assets would support the charitable causes Stephen and Margaret selected. Olivia stared at me. You would destroy $12 million rather than give it to him? I would protect what the company represents rather than allow someone unprepared to destroy it. Norman looked at the files again. For the first time that afternoon, he appeared to be thinking about something other than himself. There is another provision, I said. Olivia's eyes moved toward me. This concerns you. David placed a document in front of her. The successor's personal conduct and household stability may be evaluated when determining eligibility. What does that mean? It means anyone who pressures Norman to violate company ethics, misuse assets, or abandon his obligations can be considered a disqualifying influence. Olivia read the pages. Her face hardened. This is asking Norman to choose between me and the company. No. I met her eyes. It asks Norman to choose between destructive influence and personal responsibility. That is the same thing. Only if you intend to remain destructive. She looked toward Norman. We need to speak privately. Norman did not move. Maybe we should finish hearing him. Olivia's expression changed. The panic was now visible. Your father just announced that he is not your father. He raised me. He lied to you. To protect me. You don't know that. I know what he has done for me. Her voice became soft. Calculated. Norman, think about this. He reveals the DNA test and immediately offers a path to the company. He is using your identity crisis to control you. I could not deny that I had chosen the timing deliberately. But control was not my goal. Freedom was. I am giving Norman an opportunity to discover who he is without inherited expectations, I said. By making him spend 5 years beneath your supervision? By making him stand without my money holding him up. Olivia turned toward her husband. We should leave tonight. Go where? Norman asked. Anywhere. With what? We have savings. Norman's face tightened. How much? That isn't the point. The house belongs to the trust. The cars are leased through the company. Most of our accounts are funded from Dad's money. You have an MBA. I also have 8 years of pretending to work. The honesty shocked all of us. Norman looked down. Who would hire me at the salary you expect? We would figure it out. Meaning I would figure it out while you continued spending. Olivia dropped his hands. So you're taking his side? I'm trying to understand whether he has a point. Her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. The color left her face. She declined the call. "Who is calling?" Norman asked. "My sister." "Your sister's name is not Marcus Reeves." Olivia froze. I had seen the name before she turned the phone over. More importantly, I already knew who he was. "Marcus Reeves works at First National Bank," I said. Olivia looked at me. "I don't know what you're talking about." I opened another folder. "This is the part I hoped we would not need." Norman's face filled with dread. "What now?" 3 months ago, Olivia obtained a loan for $250,000. Norman turned toward his wife. "What loan?" "She used the house as collateral." "That house isn't in our name." "She submitted documents suggesting it was." Norman stared at her. "Did I sign anything?" Olivia's lips parted. "Norman, I can explain." "Did I sign it?" "No." "Then whose signature is on the application?" Silence. Norman stood. "You forged my name?" "I was trying to secure our independence." "By committing fraud?" "I knew your father would never give us control." "What did you do with the money?" Olivia looked around the room like a trapped animal. "I invested it." "In what?" "A wellness spa franchise." "Where?" "Phoenix." "Who arranged it?" "My friend Kelly." I placed the investigator's summary on the desk. "Kelly Morrison is not her friend." Olivia's face collapsed. "She operates fraudulent investment schemes." Norman slowly sat down. "You lost all of it." Olivia began crying. "It was supposed to triple." "You mortgaged a house we don't own, forged my signature, and gave $250,000 to someone you met online?" "I was trying to help us." "You were trying to help yourself." The anger in Norman's voice was unlike anything I had heard from him. The bank had already contacted me because Olivia stopped answering. The loan was in default. Foreclosure proceedings and fraud complaints were about to begin. Norman looked at me. "Dad, I didn't know." "I believe you." His relief lasted only a second. "What happens now?" "I am willing to pay the debt." Olivia looked up. "Thank God." "I have conditions." Her hope vanished. Norman must accept the 5-year challenge. He nodded slowly. "And Olivia must obtain legitimate employment, attend financial counseling, surrender control of every account connected to this family, and never use a Crawford asset without written permission." Olivia wiped her tears. "You're treating me like a child. You behaved like a criminal." "And if we refuse?" Norman asked. "You face the consequences without my money." "Bankruptcy. Loss of the house. Possible criminal investigation. Starting over with nothing." I gave Norman until the following morning. When they left, he paused at the study door. His eyes moved toward the employee files. For several seconds, he studied the photographs of the men and women depending on the company. Then he walked away. I did not know whether I had saved my son or shattered him. Norman did not call that evening. By 10 the following morning, I began to wonder whether he and Olivia had disappeared. Running had always been easier for him than choosing. I poured a second cup of coffee. Then a car entered the driveway. Norman stepped out alone. His suit was wrinkled. His hair was uncombed. He looked as though he had aged 5 years overnight. He knocked instead of entering. That small act told me the relationship between us had changed. "Can we talk?" "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table. Margaret had served thousands of meals there. She helped Norman with homework at that table. It was also where she cried when I first confronted her about Robert Hayes. "Where's Olivia?" "With her mother." Norman stared into his coffee. "We talked all night." "I imagine you did." "She knew." "Knew what?" "That I wasn't your biological son." The words hit me unexpectedly. "How long?" 2 years. Norman's voice was hollow. "She hired a private investigator when we started having financial trouble." "Why?" "She wanted leverage." "Against whom?" "You." He explained that Olivia had searched for a way to force an early transfer of company assets. The investigator uncovered Robert Hayes, the old conference records, and enough information to suspect the truth. Olivia intended to use the paternity secret to challenge my estate planning. She thought she could prove you had deceived me and force a court settlement. The loan was for attorneys? Partly. The investment was supposed to produce enough money to fund years of litigation. But it was a scam. Norman nodded. She married me because she believed I would inherit everything. His voice cracked. And when she realized it might not happen, she began planning how to take it anyway. The betrayal I felt was not for myself. It was for the man sitting across from me. Norman had discovered that his wife had not merely lied about money. She had built their marriage around an inheritance he might never receive. "How are you handling it?" I asked. He laughed without humor. "My mother lied about who my biological father was." He counted each truth on his fingers. "My wife married me for money. She forged my signature. She planned to sue the only father I have ever known. And I spent 8 years believing I was successful when everything in my life was paid for by you." He looked at me. "How do you think I'm handling it?" "Better than you believe." "Why?" "Because you came here." "I almost didn't." "But you did." We sat in silence. Outside the window, Margaret's roses moved in the wind. "She wants me to fight you," Norman said. "What do you want?" "I don't know. That is honest. I think I have been controlled my entire life." He looked down at his hands. "First by your expectations. Then by comfort. Then by Olivia's plans. I never wanted to control you." "No, but you protected me from every failure." "The accusation was fair." "I did. Every time I was about to face consequences, you removed them. I thought that was love." "So did I." His eyes filled. "But it taught me I never had to discover whether I could survive anything." I felt shame rise inside me. Margaret had warned me. Norman continued. "I have been afraid of disappointing you my whole life." "You never had to be." "I did." His voice became stronger. "You built something from nothing. Everyone respects you. I was terrified that if I tried and failed, you would realize I wasn't worthy of being your son. You were my son before you achieved anything. I understand that now." He wiped his eyes. "But fear gave me an excuse not to try. If I never gave real effort, I could always pretend I would have succeeded if I wanted to." That confession showed more self-awareness than I had seen from Norman in years. "What changed?" "The employee files." He looked toward the study. "I saw Tony's wife. Jim's sons. Carla's brother. They depend on decisions I treated like a game." His voice shook. "I don't want to be the kind of man who spends other people's futures before understanding what they cost." I felt pride move through me. Not because he agreed with me. Because he was finally looking beyond himself. "I'm accepting the challenge," he said. I kept my face calm. Inside, relief nearly overwhelmed me. "And Olivia? She can support me or leave." "That will not be easy." "She forged my name." His expression hardened. "I don't know whether our marriage can survive that." "What do you need from me?" "A chance." "You have one." "When do I begin?" "Tomorrow." "What time?" 6 in the morning. He winced. "Where?" "The Riverside Project." "Doing what?" "Whatever Tony tells you." Norman stood and extended his hand. "Deal?" I looked at him. Blood did not connect us. 33 years did. I took his hand. "Deal." Before leaving, Norman stopped at the doorway. "What happens if I fail?" "Then you fail." He looked surprised. "But you will fail while trying to become better than the man you were yesterday. That is more honorable than succeeding at something you never earned." Norman nodded and walked outside. He did not drive toward the house he shared with Olivia. He headed downtown. Later, I learned he rented a small apartment. For the first time in his life, he signed a lease using money he intended to earn himself. Olivia called an hour later. Her voice was filled with controlled fury. "You destroyed my marriage. I did not forge Norman's signature. You manipulated him. I told him the truth. You knew the DNA test would turn him against me. You knew about the test 2 years before he did." She became silent. "Norman told me. I was protecting our future. You were planning to steal it. I did everything for us. You did everything for the life you expected him to provide. Her voice cracked. He's leaving me. He is leaving the person who betrayed him. What if I apologize? Then apologize. Will you tell him to come home? No. Why? Because trust cannot be ordered back into existence. I can make this right. Can you return the 2 years you spent collecting secrets against him? She did not answer. Can you erase the forged signature? Silence. Can you make him believe that you would have stayed if there were no company? Her breathing became uneven. I can try. Then try. I softened my voice. But do not expect him to make forgiveness easy. Margaret betrayed you, and you forgave her. The comparison angered me. Margaret confessed before I confronted her. She accepted responsibility. She spent decades rebuilding what she broke. I paused. You are still blaming everyone except yourself. I ended the call. That afternoon, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Margaret had broken my trust once. Norman had disappointed me through laziness and entitlement. Olivia had built a marriage around greed. All three betrayals were different. The question was not whether a person failed. The question was what they did after the failure became impossible to deny. Norman arrived at the Riverside construction site at 5:58 the following morning. I watched from my truck across the road. He wore brand new boots, clean jeans, and gloves that had never touched concrete. Tony Fernandez looked him up and down. You lost? No. You're wearing boots worth more than my first car. Norman looked at them. They were the only ones I owned. Tony tossed him a reflective vest. By lunchtime, they'll be worth less. The crew laughed. Norman's face reddened. He put on the vest. What do you need me to do? Tony pointed toward a stack of materials. Start carrying. The first day nearly broke him. By 9 o'clock, his shirt was soaked. By noon, blisters had formed beneath his gloves. By 3, his back hurt and his pride hurt worse. He made mistakes. He carried materials to the wrong area. He misunderstood instructions. He dropped a tool and nearly damaged a finished surface. Tony corrected him without gentleness. Norman looked toward my truck once. I pretended not to notice. At 5:30, he could barely walk. You coming tomorrow? Tony asked. Norman looked at his bleeding hands. Yes. Tony nodded once. We'll see. The following morning, Norman arrived at 5:50. The third day, he arrived at 5:45. By the end of the first week, the new boots were scratched and covered in concrete dust. His hands were taped. He no longer looked at me for approval. He looked at Tony for the next instruction. The crew stopped laughing after the third week. Not because Norman was skilled. He was not. They stopped because he kept returning. Respect often begins with nothing more dramatic than showing up after everyone expects you to quit. During the second month, Norman made a costly mistake. He misread a delivery schedule and materials arrived 2 days late. The delay threatened the entire project timeline. His old instinct would have been to blame an assistant. Instead, he walked into Tony's trailer. I made the mistake. Tony looked at him. What are you going to do about it? I've called the supplier. I can get an emergency shipment, but the cost comes out of the project margin. And? I'll work with the scheduling team tonight and reorganize the next phase. Whose fault do they think it is? Mine. Tony leaned back. Good. Norman looked confused. Good? A man who can say the problem is his can eventually learn how to solve one. Norman stayed until after midnight. The project recovered. He never made that scheduling mistake again. 6 months into the challenge, Tony's wife experienced complications during treatment. Tony tried to work through it. Norman noticed him staring at his phone and missing measurements he would normally catch. Go to the hospital, Norman said. I'm fine. You're not. We can't lose a day. We won't. Who will manage the crew? I will. Tony laughed. You have been here 6 months. Then stay long enough to tell me what I'm about to ruin. Tony stared at him. Then he handed Norman the schedule. If anything goes wrong, I'm blaming you. You should. Norman managed the crew for 2 days. He called Tony only once. When Tony returned, the work was on schedule. That was the first time Tony referred to him as Mr. Crawford without sarcasm. Olivia refused the conditions I had offered. She declared bankruptcy. The house returned fully to the family trust. She moved in with her mother. For months, she called Norman. Sometimes she apologized. Sometimes she threatened. Sometimes she promised to change. Then she demanded that he abandon the challenge. Norman listened less each time. During the first year, he still hoped the marriage could be repaired. He asked Olivia to attend counseling. She appeared twice. At the third appointment, she sent a message saying she would not participate in a process designed to make her feel guilty. Norman finally understood that regret and accountability were not the same thing. Olivia regretted losing the house. She regretted losing access to the company. She regretted that Norman no longer obeyed her. She did not regret the choices that created those losses. They separated permanently. Norman's first year ended with no promotion. He was disappointed. "I thought I had proven myself." "You proved you can survive 1 year," I told him. "That is different from proving you can lead. What else do you want?" "I want you to stop asking what I want." He stared at me. "Ask what the company needs." That answer angered him. He left my office without saying goodbye. The following morning, he still arrived on time. 3 weeks later, he applied for an assistant supervisor position through the same process as everyone else. Tony sat on the interview panel. Norman did not receive the position. Another employee had more experience. Norman came to my house furious. "You could have approved it." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because someone else earned it." "I am your son." The words were out before he could stop them. We both became silent. Then Norman lowered his head. "That is exactly the problem, isn't it?" "Yes." He left. 6 months later, he applied again. That time, he earned the promotion. During his second year, Norman began taking night courses in project management. He already held an MBA, but for the first time he understood what he needed to learn. His questions changed. He no longer asked how quickly a project could increase profit. He asked how delays affected workers, how safety decisions affected families, how equipment investments could reduce injuries. He visited Rosa Fernandez in the hospital. He helped Jim Sullivan's sons complete scholarship applications. Not because I told him. Because he had begun seeing the people behind the payroll numbers. One evening, he found me inside the study. He held the old employee folder. "I understand now." "What?" "Why Mom made you promise to pay everyone during that first bad year." I looked at Margaret's chair. She believed money was a form of responsibility. She was right. She usually was. Norman smiled. "I wish I had listened to her more." "So do I." We sat in silence. Then he asked the question I knew would eventually come. "Do you still think about Robert Hayes?" "Sometimes." "Do you ever wonder whether he would have loved me?" "I don't know." "Do you?" "Love you?" "Yes." The question still lived inside him. I stood and placed both hands on his shoulders. "You were my son when you were born. You were my son when I learned the DNA truth. You were my son when you disappointed me. And you are my son now. Nothing a dead man's blood can do will change the life we lived." Norman's eyes filled. He embraced me. For the first time since childhood, he held on without embarrassment. The third year tested him more than the first 2. A commercial project ran into serious financial trouble. The easiest solution was to eliminate positions and replace experienced crews with cheaper temporary labor. Several executives recommended it. 5 years earlier, Norman would have approved the cuts without hesitation. Instead, he spent 2 weeks reviewing every cost. He reduced executive bonuses, renegotiated equipment leases, sold an unused property, delayed a planned office renovation. Not one field employee lost a job. The executives complained. Norman faced them across the conference table. If the people producing the work must suffer before the people making the decisions, then the people making the decisions are not leaders. I heard Margaret in those words. Not her voice. Her values. That was the moment I began believing the company might truly survive me. During the 4th year, Norman became a project manager. Tony recommended him. "I never thought I would say this," Tony told me, "but the kid listens. He's 37. He'll always be a kid to me." The promotion came with higher pay, but Norman continued living in his modest apartment. He paid down personal debts. He began saving. He stopped buying expensive suits. When I asked why, he laughed. Concrete does not respect tailoring. He also stopped asking whether I had decided to transfer the company. The inheritance mattered less as the work mattered more. That was exactly what I needed to see. 5 years and 3 months after the DNA meeting, Norman sat across from me in the same study. He no longer looked like the man who had arrived demanding ownership. His hands were calloused. His shoulders were broader. Fine lines had formed around his eyes. They came from responsibility rather than age. "The Henderson project finished under budget and 12 days early," he reported. "How?" "We improved communication between the field crews and the office." "Whose idea?" "Carla Bennett suggested it." "You gave her credit?" "She earned it." I smiled. "What about Riverside expansion?" "Profitable, but barely." "What would improve the margin?" "We could reduce labor costs." "Do you recommend that?" "No." "Why?" "Jim Sullivan's crew has been together for 8 years. They work safely, efficiently, and solve problems before management hears about them." He closed the report. "Their loyalty is worth more than the short-term savings." 5 years earlier, Norman would not have known we maintained a profit-sharing program. Now he recommended preserving it even when it reduced his own bonus. "What is your plan for next year?" I asked. "Controlled growth." He leaned back. "We take projects that challenge us without overextending our people. We invest in training. We maintain profit sharing. And we raise the emergency support fund for employees facing medical crises." "Why?" "Because people perform better when they know one disaster will not destroy their families." There it was. Leadership. Not authority. Not inheritance. The understanding that every decision carries the weight of another person's life. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside lay the transfer documents David had prepared. I placed them before Norman. He read the first page. His expression changed. "What is this?" "Effective today, you own 51% of Crawford Industries." Norman stared at me. "Dad?" "Congratulations, son." The word son carried the full weight of the journey between us. No DNA test had weakened it. 5 years of earned trust had strengthened it. Norman read the document again. Then he placed it down. "I need you to answer something honestly." "Always." "Did you plan to give me the company regardless?" "No." He looked surprised. "The dissolution provision was real. If you refused the challenge or failed through dishonesty, I was prepared to distribute the company through the alternate terms." Norman nodded slowly. "Good. Good? If this had been guaranteed, the 5 years would mean less." He looked at his hands. "I needed to know this was earned." It was. We sat quietly. For 5 years, I had been his employer, teacher, and evaluator. Now we would become partners. Father and son by choice. Business partners by merit. "There is something else," Norman said. "Olivia and I finalized the divorce last week." I was not surprised. They had remained legally married during most of the challenge but lived separately. Norman once hoped she would accept responsibility and rebuild the marriage. Olivia refused. She blamed me. She blamed the trust. She blamed the bank, the investor, and Norman. She never blamed herself. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Relieved." "Sad?" "About the person I believed she was." He looked toward the window. "But that person never existed." "Have you heard from her?" "She called after the papers were signed." "What did she want?" "To tell me she is engaged." "To whom?" "Her bankruptcy attorney." I nearly laughed. "She congratulated me on finally getting what I always wanted." "And what was that?" "That is the strange part." Norman smiled faintly. "She still thinks it was the company." "It wasn't?" "No." He touched the transfer papers. I wanted to know I could earn something meaningful. That no secret, wife, or blood test could take away. The answer made every difficult decision worth it. Someone knocked on the study door. Tony Fernandez entered wearing work boots he had carefully wiped clean. His hair was almost completely gray. Rosa had completed treatment and was doing well. "I heard it's official," Tony said. Norman stood. Tony shook his hand. "5 years ago, I thought you were a spoiled rich kid playing construction worker." "I was." Tony grinned. "You stayed. I had good teachers. You earned your place here." The praise affected Norman more than the ownership documents. "Thank you." After Tony left, Norman remained standing. "I have a proposal." "I'm listening." "I want to create the Margaret Crawford Foundation." My throat tightened. "What would it do?" "Provide college scholarships for children of construction workers and skilled tradespeople." He placed a plan on the desk. "We fund it with 5% of annual company profits." 5% is substantial. So was everything Mom sacrificed. I looked at him. "She worked 2 jobs to help you finish school. She gave up her own plans so the company could survive. Education helped build everything we have." He smiled. "She should help build futures even though she is gone." I looked toward her empty chair. Margaret had begged me to protect Norman from the truth. I had broken that promise. Yet perhaps she would understand. The truth had wounded him. It also freed him. It stripped away entitlement and forced him to decide what kind of man he wanted to become. "She would love it," I said. "I know. Call David." Norman smiled. "I already did." For the first time that afternoon, I laughed. 2 months later, Margaret's rose garden bloomed beneath the summer sun. White chairs filled the yard. Employees, spouses, and children gathered beneath the oak tree we planted when Norman graduated from high school. The first Margaret Crawford Foundation scholarships were about to be awarded. Norman moved among the guests with calm confidence. He spoke with field workers and executives in the same tone. People followed him because he had learned to stand beside them. Tony's daughter received one of the first scholarships. Jim Sullivan's sons received 2 others. Carl Bennett presented an award to the daughter of a welder who had died unexpectedly. Before announcing the recipients, Norman stood at the microphone. 5 years earlier, he would have delivered a polished speech about growth and opportunity. That afternoon, he spoke from the heart. "My mother believed a company should measure its success by more than profit." He looked toward me. "She believed every person deserves the opportunity to build something better." "My father taught me that responsibility cannot be inherited. It must be earned." He paused. "I spent most of my life believing wealth meant receiving something valuable. I was wrong. True wealth is becoming someone worthy of carrying what others sacrificed to build." The crowd applauded. I looked at Margaret's roses. For one fleeting second, I could almost imagine her standing beside them. Her hand resting against her heart. Tears in her eyes. Proud of the son she had feared losing. After the ceremony, Norman found me near the gazebo. "Dad, I want you to know something." "What?" "The 5 years were not only about proving I could lead the company." "What were they about?" "Proving I could become the son you and Mom deserved. You were always our son. I wasn't always a good one. No child is always good." I was 33. I smiled. To parents, children remain children longer than they should. He looked toward the guests. "I wish she could see this." "Maybe she can." "You believe that?" "I believe love leaves something behind. Values. Memories. Decisions." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Look at what she left inside you." Norman's eyes filled. We stood together beneath the oak tree. Not connected by blood. Connected by choice, forgiveness, work, and 38 years of shared life. I once believed inheritance meant deciding who received your property after death. I understand it differently now. Money can be inherited. Buildings can be inherited. Companies, houses, and land can be transferred with signatures. But character cannot be transferred. Responsibility cannot be handed over. Respect cannot be written into a will. Those things must be earned one decision at a time. Norman did not inherit my blood. He inherited my example. For many years, he ignored it. Then life stripped away every excuse. He could have run. He could have chosen Olivia's lies. He could have spent the rest of his life blaming Margaret, blaming me, and blaming the DNA report. Instead, he arrived at a construction site at 6 in the morning. He carried materials. He blistered his hands. He made mistakes. He returned the next day. And the day after that. That was how my son found his way home. Not to my house. To himself. As for Olivia, I do not hate her. Hatred requires energy I no longer wish to give her. She invested 8 years in an inheritance she never understood. She believed marrying my son entitled her to everything Margaret and I built. In the end, her greed cost her the very future she tried to steal. That was not revenge. It was consequence. There is a difference. Revenge seeks pain. Consequences reveal truth. I did not force Olivia to forge a signature. I did not force her to take the loan. I did not make her insult Margaret or manipulate Norman. I simply stopped using my money to protect her from what she had done. Sometimes love means forgiveness. I learned that from Margaret. Sometimes love means boundaries. I learned that from Olivia. Sometimes love means allowing someone to struggle until they discover their own strength. I learned that from Norman. For years, I believed protecting my son meant removing every hardship. I was wrong. A person who never carries weight never discovers how strong his back can become. A person who never fails never learns that failure is survivable. A person who receives everything may never understand the value of anything. The greatest gift I gave Norman was not Crawford Industries. It was the opportunity to earn it. When the scholarship ceremony ended, the yard slowly emptied. Norman remained behind to help the workers remove chairs. 5 years earlier, he would have left before the cleanup began. Now he was the final person carrying tables toward the storage truck. I watched him from the porch. His sleeves were rolled up. Sweat darkened his collar. Tony said something that made him laugh. The employees around him did not treat him like an owner. They treated him like one of their own who had earned the right to lead. That was the moment I knew the company was safe. More importantly, my son was safe from the worst version of himself. Margaret and I had finally completed the most important work of our lives. We had not raised a perfect son. We had raised a man capable of changing. And perhaps that is the best any parent can hope for. 7 days after Margaret died, Olivia believed the old woman was gone and everything could finally belong to her. She was wrong. Margaret remained inside the company's values. Inside the trust she helped create. Inside every employee protected from careless greed. Inside the scholarships carrying her name. And inside Norman, who eventually became the man she always believed he could be. The DNA report proved I was not his biological father. The following 5 years proved biology was the least important part of fatherhood. A father is the man who stays. The man who teaches. The man who forgives without pretending wrongdoing does not matter. The man who refuses to abandon his child, even when love requires him to stop making life easy. Norman was not born from my blood. But he became my son through every honest day we chose one another. Today, Crawford Industries remains profitable. The warehouse district Olivia wanted to sell is now one of our strongest divisions. Tony Fernandez serves as senior field advisor. Rosa remains cancer-free. Jim Sullivan's sons both completed college with assistance from the Margaret Crawford Foundation. Carla Bennett now directs our employee support program. Norman leads the company with the controlled growth strategy he developed. He still calls me before major decisions. Not because the trust requires it. Because we are partners. And because he finally understands that asking for guidance is not the same as depending on someone to carry you. I visit Margaret's grave every Sunday. I tell her about the company. I tell her about Norman. I tell her how the first scholarship recipient wrote that no one in her family had ever attended college. Sometimes I apologize for revealing the secret she asked me to protect. Then I remember Norman standing beneath the oak tree, speaking about responsibility and sacrifice. I believe she would forgive me. After all, Margaret understood better than anyone that forgiveness does not erase the past. It creates the possibility of a better future. The true inheritance meeting did not happen inside my study. It happened across 5 years. Every morning Norman arrived before sunrise. Every mistake he admitted. Every worker he learned to respect. Every decision in which he chose people over easy profit. Those were the moments when he inherited the company. The legal documents only confirmed what his character had already earned. That is the lesson Margaret left us. What matters most cannot simply be handed down. It must be lived. Respect must be earned. Trust must be protected. Love must be demonstrated. And a legacy is not measured by what someone receives when you die. It is measured by the kind of person they become because you lived. As I stood beneath the fading summer light and watched Norman help load the final chair, I felt Margaret beside me. Not as a ghost. As a presence inside everything we had built. The company was in good hands. The foundation carried her name. And the boy we had once protected from every difficult truth had become a man strong enough to carry one. Norman looked toward the porch. "Need anything, Dad?" I smiled. "No, son." For the first time in years, it was completely true. I needed nothing. My wife's memory was honored. My son had found himself. And the inheritance that mattered most had finally been claimed. Not through blood. Not through entitlement. But through 5 years of honest work, painful truth, and a love strong enough to demand change.